AP European History with Dr. Brovkin. Today's segment is on John Calvin, and we continue to study Reformation. So to put Calvin in the context of Reformation, obviously, he writes his first book in 1534. Prior to that, he graduates from college, from law, degree of law in Paris. So he lives in the atmosphere of ongoing spread of Protestantism, or at that time basically associated with Luther. However, Luther was not the only one. In many, many cities, there are these societies of formed of people discussing religion and the meaning of the Bible. One of the famous ones is Zwingli in Zurich and Anabaptists in the Low Countries. So he is not the only one. He is in that context of ongoing discussion in a kind of a protest against the Catholic Church. In the end, there will be many, many types of Protestantism, but what united them all already at that time is that they don't like the Pope, they don't like the relics, they don't like transfiguration, this idea that you drink the blood of Jesus and you eat his body, and many, many other rituals associated with this blind faith of the Catholics. Of course, they don't like the corruption of the church and the selling of indulgences and all the rest of it. But when you actually say, what do they want instead, there you have the differences, and there is this debate going on. Now, Calvin was very well educated. He participated in several theological debates, and by just his eloquence, and he acquired immediate reputation as one of the savants. He writes his first book, which turns out to be the most important one, Institutes of Christian Learning, in 1534. As most of the books at that time, they were immediately banned, but there was this kind of what Russians call samizdat, which means self-publishing. There was no copyright. So if you found a printing press somewhere, you could have it printed, and then it would the demand would grow. People would sell it in all kinds of ways, and then sometimes the publishers would be punished, sometimes not. But in any case, it was always possible to find a place to publish something, because the state was not so powerful, because you could always find a place in Switzerland or in Germany or in Belgium or somewhere, if it's English, if it's French speaking, if it's German speaking, mostly in Switzerland or in the Low Countries, etc. So he published his book. Now, the context also is that he had to respond to Luther. And then we come to the point of Luther's main thesis, that you will be saved by faith alone. So he agrees with Luther that you cannot be saved by good deeds as the Catholic Church. No, he agrees, yes, that's true. Deeds are nothing. But he goes much further than Luther, and he asserts his central thesis, which is predestination. So his main idea is that it's not so simple. Predestination is much more complex than people think. Outwardly, all it means is that your fate is predetermined, that you will be saved or not. Has nothing to do with you, that this is God's will. And moreover, God knows in advance who will be saved or who not. Now, when you think about it, it's very important, because he's trying to say to Luther, that a lot of times people admit that Luther's treatment, from Calvin's point of view, is a deal, is a business transaction, similar to the business transaction of the Catholics. Because the Catholics say, pay to the church, good deeds, and then you're saved. Now, Luther says, you believe in God, and then you'll be saved, which is another transaction. If you do this and that, you will get this and that. That's business. If you do this, you get this. Now, Calvin says, no, there is no business transaction with the God. There's nothing you can do, because God is above any of the transactions. He may or he may not save you, and you don't know until the very end whether you are saved or not. What does it mean? Does it mean you can be bad? No, you should be good, but should not expect reward for your behavior. You should be good anyway. You should live a life of Jesus' message without any expectation of any reward. That's the true meaning of predestination. However, he goes further than that. He basically says that some people will be saved and they are the elite. And they are the chosen ones. And here it's very true. A lot of scholars said that he is similar to the Jews, to Judaism, who believe that they are chosen people. So let me read you a direct quote from his writings so that we can exactly understand what he means by predestination. In conformity, therefore, to the clear doctrine of the Scripture, we assert that by an eternal and immutable counsel, God has once for all determined both whom he would admit to salvation and whom he would condemn to destruction. We affirm that this counsel, as far as concerns the elect, is founded on his gratuitous mercy, totally irrespective of human merit, but that to those whom he devotes to condemnation, the gate of life is closed by a just and irreprehensible but incomprehensible judgment. Which basically means you cannot try to understand what God's intentions are. Don't even try. God is above all of this. But then he goes further than that. And if he had stopped just at that, it would be kind of like a dispute with Luther. But he goes much further than that. In Luther and in many other Protestants, the church is not significant. It's your direct communication with God that's important. With Calvin, the church is important. He says, I quote, "The church should regulate all detail of faith, morals, worship, and state, and physical presence of the church should enforce these regulations." By this sentence, he basically says, the church and the government is what? Look at this. I mean, he's basically like the Jews. He's saying that there should be a theocratic government based on religious law. The church is the government. That is not Luther, that's not Protestantism, that's not toleration. This is pretty much like Ayatollah. I mean, this is a religious state, which is fusion of the state and secular authority. Which also means that if you break any of the rules of the church, and the church means Calvin's church, you will be punished in the name of God. Now this is interesting. He basically usurps the right to judge people, at the same time asserting that God doesn't judge you, it's already predetermined. And yet his church is going to judge people what is moral, what is not, what is admissible, what is not. In a sense, he is in this statement, as early as 1534, he set up a government that would be 20 years later when he will rule Geneva. Now, the next interpretation of this key idea is that the divine or the God-given law is the cause of all events, which of course contradicts science. This is another interesting look at Calvin, because he's totally against science, because the divine is the source of everything, which means, you know, he didn't know Darwin, but basically if there were Darwin, he would be against that too. The source of everything is God, and therefore science has no space in this kind of theology, and especially in this kind of state that he's going to create. Okay, so in terms of his life, after the publication of the Institutes, it's sort of seized, and he's warrant for his arrest. He goes around from one place to another, and then he winds up, his life gets up very connected to two cities, Strasbourg, which is German at that time, and Geneva. And Geneva is a democracy. It has a council. It has elections. It has citizens. It's a place with very, very lively debate. And the political landscape in Geneva, basically, in simple terms, is like this: you have political parties that are all religious. You have leaning to Protestantism, the so-called libertines. And then you have a pro-Catholic party, and then very quickly he creates his own party, which is basically winning elections. At first he loses in 1541, and the libertines and the pro-Catholics win elections, and they form a government against the strictures of morality, and they find it too tough and too encroaching on their freedoms. And then they went overboard. The Catholics begin to restore Catholicism, and that totally antagonized the people of Geneva. And in 1545, after a few years, they invite him back. So from that time until his death is in 62, he pretty much is the government of Geneva. There is a council, but he has a voice that is more powerful than anybody else's. So this is very, very important to say, what exactly does he create? What is the government of Geneva under Calvin? It is very similar to Savonarola, as a matter of fact. Well, no carousing, no card playing, no music, no theater, no entertainment, no drinking, no alcohol, modesty. Women should be dressed. There's a dress code. Women should be dressed modestly. Especially the theater is forbidden. It's a pretty humble existence, and it is enforced. And I don't remember the statistics, but basically the punishment is you banish, you're exiled from Geneva. But on some occasions, and I'll talk about one today, there were people killed. There were people executed with direct participation and direct influence of Calvin. There's one thing that many of you have not mentioned, which is crucial. Calvin lives in Geneva. Geneva is a city which is known today for its banking, like a major banking city in the world, and Zurich, of course, too. It was like that then. So he happens to be in a city where his livelihood and his life depends on it, because if he goes to France, he will be arrested as a heretic. But Genevans make money, they're bankers. And so my reading is that inadvertently, just as a political compromise, as something that he had to do to please the city, he admits one thing into his teaching, which turned out to be probably the most important. He basically says it's okay to make money and to take interest, like the Jews. Again, another similarity with Judaism. Now that seems to be a minor thing. When you read theology of Calvin, it's all about God and the predestination and about the role of the church and of Christ and all that stuff. Nobody's saying the central piece that made him popular is you can be a good Christian and make money. And I assert that is what made Calvin and Calvinism the mover and shaker of the next century. Because he immediately found an audience of people who were merchants, who were businessmen, who didn't like the Catholic Church. And now they could say, oh gosh, I can make money and feel free, that I am not going to be damned. This is not sin. This is a total liberation. If Medici were making money and felt guilty and were trying to buy off their permission by building churches and sponsoring all kinds of projects for the church, knowing full well that what they're doing is basically sinful, but they paid for their sins building a nice church, sponsoring this, sponsoring that. Now, this is liberation in a sense. You could be a good Christian and a Protestant, no Pope, no relics, none of that stuff, and at the same time, honestly make money. And that's okay. This is something that probably was revolutionary in his doctrine, and I think he stumbled into it just out of political expediency. And that pretty much created his immense popularity among the merchant classes of France, where his version of Protestantism, not Luther's, would become the order of the day for the next 200 years. The future Huguenots are French Calvinists, and then it would spread to other countries, and I think it's because of this admission of money-making. So, to sum up, his rule in Geneva is basically a theocratic dictatorship of the church, his own church. It is, in a sense,